Go ahead, Ben.
Oh, I was just gonna asking if you can share with me like what have you been like what's been the goal of your meetings in terms of what you're hoping to achieve.
Um, so we've been meeting for a couple years now, different people. I don't know, Carl, how long you've been. It's probably been a year since you came in,
Yeah,
right?
I think I found the group summer 2021.
Okay. Yeah, so a little bit over a year, and then we were a year before that. Me and Tim got together on our different projects. So we all kind of you know, are worried about um the world's ability to um I'm starting to say make decisions, but think critically is probably the way we would have phrased it back then. Um and uh and we were each working on in different ways for quite a long time. So Tim's been working on his for over 10 years. I know Carl, you've been a while, but we didn't find each other till the last 3 years or so. So we just thought we'd get together and see if there's anything that we could do together. I've actually been kind of talking with like three different groups of people doing different things. This is the only one really with debate and argument maps, but it's funny that if people kind of have a whole bunch of ideas and then they come together as a group after the idea has been formed, it's very hard for someone um, to collaborate in general. So I see this in lots of groups I'm working with. We've decided to try and build an interchange format. Um, and then to do that, we said, oh, we need to go back and do definitions. So we've been building kind of a list of definitions and terms so we understand what we're talking about. And then so the interchange format, we've done a couple of swings at it, but um, nothing really solidified. And then most recently, like several people are deep down into their ideas. Like Mark Antoine is building something that are likely or designing something that will likely kind of be one of the base formats for interchanging. If we kind of agree to it. So um that's kind of it's I think where we are right now is kind of coming together on so just some other ideas. We worked on kind of a competition called Maps. And so that they worked on that for a couple months. And then we're also working on there's something else, but I forgot it. I don't know, Carl, if you wanna add anything to that.
I don't think I have anything. Well, I guess no. The one thing I would add is that I think it was last year when I joined. Stephen was, I would say Stephen was sort of facilitating uh, for a product definition process through using a Trello board.
Right, that's what I
That
was
was,
thinking.
yeah, yeah. So that was going on pretty strong for. Well, I guess I don't know how much was going on before I joined, but do you want to say more about that, Bentley?
I
Since
think
I've
it
just
was about your time, and then also on in that same vein, it's kind of like we wanted to step back and say, okay, which will also help us explain to other people, but what are our overall goals? How do they align? And then, kind of where are we? So I think we want to kind of take a step back, define our individual kind of goals and aspirations, and then as a group what they are, and then kind of define it. And yeah, and in the Slack, Carl just posted the link to our Trello board for our language.
yeah, you might need access. I don't know how access works. Oh no, I think I'm not even logged in. I can see it. So
Something's asking me for access.
is it?
I guess that was just Airtable trying to hook up. I mean, that was Slack trying to hook up something with Trello. Yeah, so that's kind of our terminology and definitions process, getting very specific on means because, a lot of this language is very conceptual and has been used for hundreds of years to mean many different things. So what is truth, So
So just to help me understand this Trello board, consensus means that there's agreement on, for let's say the word fragment. That means that the word fragment is a term that you guys will use among each other because you have a consensus on what it means.
I think in general that's correct. Not it doesn't mean that like everyone signed off of it, but there's kind of a quorum of people that have. So if you open up like fragment, you'll see aligned
Got
to
it.
definition, you'll see several names there. So we kind of have a list. And so like I haven't
What's-
checked off on that one, but
What is archive column for?
good question. Yeah, I don't know if that's, yeah, I'm not sure. We might have to ask Steven, who's kind of heading that up. I don't know if those are things they decided to. Those do look like they were definitions by individual people. So you'll see there's parentheses MAP and parentheses Steven on some. So I think we had a card for each of us to propose a different meeting. And then when we kind of come to one card, then we kind of archive the old one, I think is kind of how it was.
Okay. Okay. So it's like a trash.
Yeah.
Bit in a way. Okay. All right. All right. I'll take a look at this. You also mentioned you're involved in multiple groups. So is there multiple groups that's working on critical thinking problem?
Well, the other groups, so there's Open Global Mind, which part of their process is looking at critical thinking, but they're also in like food security. And so it's basically kind of a do-gooder group. Thought, tools for thought, and stuff like that. So Canonical Debate Lab is kind of an honorary subgroup of the Open Global Mind group, which Open Global Mind is participating with several other groups on a Mattermost instance. So yeah, it's a very loose federation of kind of do-gooder groups. And then I'm kind of in the Game B community, although not as much anymore. I don't know if you've heard about Game B. So it's from game theory, there's game A, which is today, and game B is a theoretical future state that we don't know what it is. So it's people trying to figure out what would that state be? How can we get to that state? A lot of the people in that community are thinking that there's going to be a collapse of society sometime in the next 5-10 years, and they're preparing for that. Other people are working on. So it's, if you've heard of, I don't know if you've heard of Gemrut or but it's a pretty popular podcast. Who's the other guy that's really more well known?
Say Jim Raw.
Rutt, R-U-T-T. Jim Rutt. There's probably not a really good description of Game B because it's very much, the community in itself doesn't like defining things really well. And no one knows what Game B is, so no one allows anyone else in Game B to say what Game B is. It's a bit woo-woo in that way. Yeah. So it's kind of that, it's just a different flavor of community. So it's the Open Global Mind community, the Game B community, and then the Canonical Debate Lab. But those other two communities are pretty large, like hundreds of people. But much more scattered in its focus. It's like anything that improves the world is there, and then we're very specifically focused on critical thinking and critical thinking tools. Mostly in argument mapping is kind of what our theory is that's a required, not required, but it is the tool that we're focusing on out of all of the possible ways of improving human cognition. Schmachtenberger. I don't know if you've heard of Daniel Schmachtenberger. Anyways, he's kind of in that community as well. The Game B.
Carl, thank you. Carl, to help me understand, so I talked with Bentley previously one-on-one to as part of my introduction into the CDO. What are you working on? If you don't mind sharing about your project, Carl.
Yeah, I don't mind sharing. My project, I'll type it in the Hangouts, but I call it How'd You, and it's short or whatever a phrase for how'd you know that.
Hmm.
And basically, what I'm doing is I I have this vision of something I want. So when I'm reading a news article or I'm reading a social media post or anything that contains information, frequently I have like one of two things going on. I either like read something and I question it. I'm like, oh, I wonder, is that supported? Is it unsupported? And so I kind of want a system that would help me more quickly get at answers around is a particular claim true or false, or
Right.
some nuance one or the other, or I dig into a claim myself, and I spend an hour, 2 hours sometimes digging down into a claim. You end up in articles and research, and you oftentimes will come to a conclusion. You'll say, okay, I think this is mostly true for this table that I found, table 14 in this somewhat obscure article. But there was that other article which kind of questioned this result, and then I'm done. But at least for my own purposes at that time. But what do I do with that effort? I've just spent 2 hours, of quality time researching a claim, and that's it. It lives in my head. I may forget it. I can't share it with anyone. So I would really like a system where I can record that information. So something like, what's the claim I was researching? And then in the basic case, just recording the justification, saying, was this true? Was this false? Or again, something in between, more nuanced. And if there's more detail, like maybe go deeper, say, okay, this was the initial claim, but then I realized that I had to break it down into these subclaims, then these subclaims are supported in these ways. So yeah, that's what I want. And so I'm tinkering on How'd You to try and make it more like a prototype of what I want. And then when I think that it's what I want, then I'm curious to try and share it with people. I don't really think I don't know how, I'm not a great marketing person or a great salesperson. I'm, sort of more that technical implementer. So I don't know if I've done a great job in this group expressing what it is I want, but to the degree that I think I've expressed what I want, I feel like I haven't gotten traction in this group, which makes me nervous. But I don't know. Stephen also Socrates is very similar to How'd You in structure. So I mean, I think really the big difference. Have you talked to Stephen at all or looked at his project Socrates?
I might have looked at it, but I haven't spoken to him yet.
Yeah, I mean, the big difference I notice right now is the two things. I'm very interested in a concept called appearances, where the system can record that a particular claim appears in one place. And I think Stephen is dabbling in that also with he's got an example of like an annotated article. I don't know how far he wants to go down that route. So, I kind of envision a hyper layer or like a meta layer, whatever you call it, a superstructure that's on top of existing media. So blogs, news articles, social media posts, they can all be incorporated into How'd You, or whatever the system may become. And appearances are a big part of that. A user actually affirmatively entering into the system, hey, I believe that this what we call what do we call these right now? I call them propositions. Outside of our group you might call them claims, but sort of the standalone claim, I think that's what we're calling it in our group. That's the closest we got to defining it in our process. So this standalone claim, which is surprisingly difficult to define clearly, a person saying, I think this sort of objective standalone declarative sentence is what is expressed by this phrase or this text run or this sentence in this social media post or in this article or whatever. And then so then that's bringing it into the system and then adding the justifications to then critique whether it's true or false. And I envision like a web browser extension that sort of highlights on a page, like, hey, here's all the things that have already been analyzed on this page with some summaries of oh, is it do groups tend to think it's more true? Do groups tend to think it's more false? Is it contested? Do groups like this, like sort of imagine different types of groups, like clustering people into different belief, sort of belief clusters, and say, okay, some people like this think this is very true. Some people like that think it's very false. So that's the one thing, the appearances. And then I don't know how interested Stephen is in, what do we call this? I guess I call them source excerpts. Well, no, because someone's interested in this because we started looking at this in the definition process. I think CDL is calling these media fragments. I started calling them source excerpts. But the basic idea is that there's a fixed medium, digital perhaps, or most likely in our case, could be PDF, web page, I don't know, YouTube video, I think. And then you identify some particular fragment of it. So like a portion of the video, or a region of an image, or a text run in some textual format. And I forget what people want to do with it. What I want to do with it is, one, I think that would be an appearance. So you'd use that to anchor an appearance in a place. And then also for justification. So if you're saying, hey, I believe that, this media fragment here, let's say it's a table in a table in a research paper. I believe that it proves this proposition true. And, this proposition is what appears over in this blog. So therefore, this blog is supported with this evidence, you might call it. So that's kind of what I'm interested in up to. Right now I'm working, well, to get very specific, I'm adding TypeScript and ESLint to Howju, because Howju was like ECMAScript, basically, like sort of like fancy JavaScript, but there was no typing. And I'm learning through the process of adding typing that I made a lot of sort of loose assumptions in certain places. And it's been very instructive to be like, oh, wow, that thing that I, over here, I thought it was this, and over here, I thought it was that. And now that I have to bring them together in a type, it's clarifying things for me. But anyway, the feature purpose, like the product purpose I'm trying to work towards, is adding the appearances to Howju. So right now there's no concept of appearances in the actual prototype, but I'd like to have appearances. So what I'd like to be able to do is go to some source. I don't know, I hear a lot of people talking about the Great Reset from that guy at the WEF, Schwab. So I'm curious, like, what's in there? And if I'm going to spend all this time reading this, whatever it is, 100-page PDF about the Great Reset, or whatever it's called, I'd be very, I would kind of like to capture, okay, what are the claims I think Schwab is making? And then if, for the ones I'm curious about, I'd kind of like to, say, do a little research and say, does it look true? Does it look false to me? And I'd like to share that with someone, say, hey, here's my, initial look at the contents of Great Reset, along with, my initial analysis of the claims that I thought were worth looking into, and see if that gains traction. That's sort of sharing. So it's like a social sharing of analysis. Yeah, and maybe that's something else I could mention about Howju is even though I'm currently the only user of Howju, and the vision is largely only mine because I don't know, no one's ever come to me and said, hey, it would be really cool if Howju did this. I imagine it being a social tool where, multiple people can use the tool, and their content is, what's the word I'm looking for? Like cognizable. Like the tool can make sense of different people having different, I guess, viewpoints. So they could phrase things differently, and the tool could let you say, okay, these two propositions are equivalent. Well, this person thinks they're equivalent, but that person doesn't think they're equivalent, and here's the reasons they give for them not being equivalent. These propositions are related, like they freely come up together, but they're not equivalent. There's a bunch of different relations you could have, and our group this CDL group has discussed some relations between standalone claims before. So yeah, so that's kind of what I'm interested in.
That's interesting. Thank you for sharing. So another way to capture what you shared is, at some point along the way, you came to the conclusion that not every idea that pops into your awareness is true, and that it's important to go through the process of identifying the cause that gave rise to that idea. Did it came from someone else, or did I draw its conclusion on my own from other antecedent premises?
Yeah, I'd agree with that. And I would also say that it occurred to me that it's very important to try and succinctly state what you think the idea is. Because I've noticed in myself and others that if you're wishy-washy about what you think the idea is, it's very hard to find out if it's true or false. So first, paraphrase the claim or paraphrase the proposition or the standalone claim, whatever we want to call it, and then analyze it and say, okay, is that true or false? And sometimes through that process, you learn, oh, wait, I didn't phrase it properly. So you have to rephrase it, kind of move the conversation. Like, okay, this is a better phrasing. Now with this phrasing, is it true or false? And I may come to my own conclusion, and then other people may look at it and, given their expertise or their experience, their knowledge, their exposure, they may be like, oh, no, you're missing this thing entirely. You're getting blindsided. You're going to get blindsided by this fact or this idea. And that's another thing I'm interested in. I'm interested in eliciting critique from others because I recognize that I have blind spots in my understanding, my awareness, and I would like other people to point those out and say, oh yeah, like this thing here totally contradicts your point here. So you should be aware of it. I would like Howju or a system like it to provide notifications like that. So, hey, this user that, somehow the system is determined is not spamming you, has created this content, and it, directly relates to this content you've already added. So here's a notification informing you that you may want to come look at it.
Okay. I assume that for both of you, this is a personal project, meaning you have some other occupation, and then, but this is what you do on the side as with your free time, with your non-professional working time. Okay.
Yeah, I don't get paid for Howju, and it's a side project.
Okay. I mean, just to be fair, and because this is our first time talking about it, let me share with you about myself and
Sure.
how I got into this group. So my background was technical, computer science. I went down the route of creating a business, started studying philosophy on my own about 11 years ago. And through that process, built relationships with people in that philosophy community. And about 2 years ago, one of them, who is a philosophy instructor, posted on Facebook asking if someone could help him with a certain thing. I forget what he was asking for, help with a tool that he was working with, or to create something. Maybe it was to create something. And so I reached out to him, and he sent me, I think, 60-page document that it's kind of like the instructions or the first thing you read in his introduction to philosophy class on critical thinking. And basically that's a document that talks about argument maps. And it introduces, it presumes what you already understand, what you already brought up, which is, it's important to check why you believe what something is true. But it also brings up, introduced to me this concept of epistemic status, which you can think of it as being metadata. So it's data about your data, right? So one way I've recently structured the way I think about this is there's at least 3 levels of thinking about something, right? There is the question of what is it? So what's in front of me? It's a monitor. What am I feeling? I'm feeling content. What is it, right? The second question is why, or how do you know that's true? If it's something that you can observe directly, you say, I observed it. If it's something you didn't observe directly, then you have to go through this process. Okay, what are the premises that you led you to draw this conclusion? And sometimes the premise is just, I heard it on the news channel, right? And that's it. Like, so how do I know that it's true? But the third level, which is to what degree do I know it to be true? And so that's what epistemic status captures. And to give you a specific example, let's use the claim or the proposition, black holes exist. So how do I know that's true? Well, I read some books, I watched Discovery Channel, I watched YouTube, and pretty much in those various things I've read or watched, you have some scientists talking about black holes, describing it, yada, yada, yada. I watched some science fiction movie, they demonstrated, science fiction is still fiction, but I presume the science fiction writer did some research with the scientists. So there's some sort of consensus. I don't know if it's majority or minority, but there's a consensus at least in the scientific, in the community of experts, people who are trained, who've studied the subject a lot, who has done observation, created the models, that are claiming to me that black holes is true. Like, okay, all right. So what is the status for black holes is true? Well, the experts say that they exist, but I actually haven't observed the data myself. I have not looked at the models, and it's not like there's nothing in my life that I can see that tells me that it concretely exists. Like electricity, I can say with certainty it exists because I can turn on the light bulbs. Things I interact with on a daily basis, demonstrate to me the existence of this power, this invisible power that we call electricity. Not so with black holes. But more importantly, I don't really care about black holes that much to go become a physicist, to look at the observations, to learn the math, to do the modeling. And so for me, black hole has the status of possible, which is better than arbitrary, meaning no evidence. Possible, meaning there's expert evidence, but it's not probable, meaning it's not beyond 50%, because I haven't collected any other evidence beyond just what the expert says. And it certainly is not certain because I haven't done sufficient work to even achieve that. And I don't even know if the experts themselves would say with certainty that black holes exist. So for me, it's possible. So that's the concept of epistemic status is something that was introduced in that document. Another thing that was introduced in the document is the idea of epistemic status propagation. And so every single so the words he used in his document,
Who is this professor, by the way, or this philosopher?
Greg Salmieri. I'll type it in.
Yep.
Greg Salmieri. I don't think he's presenting as being his original ideas, but he's just using it to teach the class. The other idea is epistemic status affects your conclusion. So your premises have certain statuses. The quality of the validity of your inference itself affects the status of the conclusion. And so, for example, if you have two premises that are true, but it's a non sequitur inference, then your conclusion is arbitrary, has no meaning. Alternatively, if you have a valid conclusion, but one of your premises is certain, the other one is possible, then your conclusion really cannot be probable or certain. It would stick with like the lowest status of the premises, right? So the idea of having that data be captured and be taught about in your head, so that just because you have reasons for believing in something does not mean that those reasons are sufficient for you to say that this is true with certainty. And so that to me was valuable.
Sorry. Sorry for arriving late, real apologies. But what you just said now, is each reasoning independent? Meaning if I have some conclusion is supported by either A and B or C and D, right? There's multiple paths to proof. Does that mean that you need to capture each path separately? Because if it's really the maximum of the minima in such a case.
I do know that a single conclusions can have multiple arguments, meaning multiple sets of premises that have their own independent inference.
Yes.
And it can be different inference type. One could be an abduction, one could be a deduction or induction, right? So you certainly can have that. I never got, okay, so let me kind of back up and just give you a quick highlight. I'm just kind of describing how I got involved in this and how I went to join this community. And I was describing some of the information I acquired from this document that a professor would give to his classrooms that I interacted with. So I never got into it deep enough with him to find out if you have like 3 weak argument, 1 strong argument, I think his position would be the strong argument would carry the day. Like the weak
Yes.
arguments doesn't bring down the strong argument, but a weak premise will bring down an argument, even if the argument is totally valid. So I think that's
So, okay, so there's a distinction between argument and premise.
yes. So an argument is a set of premises and
Okay.
inference to support a conclusion.
Okay. So then what would, in my case, what you'd have is those would be 2 different arguments with each 2 premise. So
Yes.
that makes perfect sense. So you have
Yes.
the conjunctive normal form as it is. Disjunctive normal form.
And sometimes you can have the same premise being reused in both arguments,
Of
but they're
course.
inferred with different side premises. So
Okay,
yeah,
so
so
you materialize the argument. That sounds perfectly reasonable. Thank you.
okay, so epistemic status trickle up, and so the idea is that he wanted to have a tool that he can use to teach his students these concepts. And what he would do with the tool is he would use it to unpack or to map out popular argument, like the numerous arguments for God or against the existence of God, as an example, and then map out the statuses for those claims and whatnot to put up. So I saw that was very interesting. I came to the same conclusion that I think it could be very valuable. Same conclusion that you guys did, and that it could be very valuable in helping people think more clearly, because I do agree with the view that lack of critical thinking is a serious problem in society today. And so I actually decided to make an investment and to create a company, hired some developers too, and partner with him to work on this tool. And so we've been working on the tool for about 2 years. He is using it in his classroom and in a few workshops outside of his classroom. I don't think the tool is of a sufficient quality for me to invest money to market it yet. Because my background is business, I do think about ways to monetize this tool. Although this is not a project that I'm hanging my hat on as a big money maker. But if it does, then it will have an impact on the world, right? So I did thought about the social aspect of, let's say, allowing people to edit the maps. But as I was using the tool myself to map out my own thinking, I came to a realization that thinking requires a lot of effort. Thinking clearly, meaning spending time and effort to get the ideas in your head clear. And part of being clear is what you said, Carl, getting your idea into the right sentence form. And sometimes you sit there and you play with the sentence form. And especially with this tool where you're supposed to get your sentence form into a format that allows for you to have the strongest inference possible. And the strongest inference, now, not every inference is going to be this, because you can't. But the strongest inference is typically a deductive inference, right? It's a valid form. And deductive inferences means you have to have terms for you to then say it fits this format. And so I find myself sitting there playing with my propositions and my sentence and my conclusions to find a way to make the terms obvious. And so the tools can, in the future, I hope that it can facilitate that by providing people with templates. Because again, I'm offering from the premise that people are not taught to think understand these different forms that you can organize your thoughts into. So you should provide them with like a template, like fill in the blank type kind of stuff, and automatically generate the diagram. So there's a lot that can be done from a tool, from just to educate the user. Forget social, just for themselves to think more clearly about a certain idea that they have in their head, that we're not even there yet. So at some point the social will come in, but even then, I don't know how. I don't think like a single map is going to have like 1,000 users working on it, because the number of people who actually want to put an effort to get to work on an idea, I think on any particular idea, I think it's kind of limited to the people who are really interested or invested in that idea in some way. And so, for example, we all have opinions on, let's say, the election, climate change, whatever problem, Ukraine, whatever, right? But, you know, I think like I certainly don't care to invest a lot of time to think about Ukraine or climate change or that kind of stuff. And I think other people are kind of probably similar. They're not interested in spending as much time thinking about these subjects. And so they're not going to spend the time to use the tool on those subjects that, let's say, people who specialize in that subject would do. But they might use a tool to figure out answers to the question of, should I marry this person? You know, that might be a relevant use of a thinking tool, critically to think about what's in front of them. So, yeah. So, and then, oh, how did I get into the CDL? So, I posted about the argument map on the philosophy forum, and Tom, I forget his last name, Tom, made a comment, or no, he also posted something. I reached out to him, and then he introduced me to CDL.
What's the philosophy forum?
It's called, okay, so the philosophy basically is Ayn Rand, it's objectivism. The philosophy forum is this one. So it's a private forum by Harry Bingswang, who's a philosopher specializing in her philosophy. So, yeah. There's one more layer that I really want to get to once I get past the problem of getting sentences into the right forms to fit into arguments. So once I get the challenge of getting people to form valid arguments, and it's with concepts specifically itself. You know, you guys are spending a lot of time trying to, or have spent a lot of time trying to define the meanings, the definitions to the words, right? And it's interesting because I asked Greg, the philosopher / business partner, what do you think is like the biggest problem that people have? Is it because they're not checking their premises? Is it because they're forming invalid inferences? You know, which one of those things is? And he said that that's not the biggest problem. The biggest problem is they're not using valid concepts. And when I think about it, I'm like, it makes sense because, you know, one concept that I kind of been like, I don't want to say been thinking about is the concept of homelessness, right? So, you know, people generally say homelessness is a problem, but the concept of homelessness is kind of like a bad concept because packaged in the concept of homeless there are people who have lost their mind. Either they were born without it or they use drugs and they destroyed their mind, so they can't really operate. And then there are people who are temporarily, you know, displaced because they lost their job, have medical issues, whatever, right? But they still have their mind. And the solutions you give to them have to be different. Like if you give this person a place to stay, some clean clothes, they can find a job, work, and then they're on their way. These people, I mean, they require hospitalization, right? I mean, you can't give the same, you give them a house, they'll destroy it in 30 days or 90 days. You can't give the same solution to two very different people, but when you group them into one concept, and you're like, what is the solution to this problem? Well, it's not one solution because it's not one problem. It's like it's two distinct problems that you have. And so that's an example of where, and when you think about it, there has always been people throughout history who don't have homes. The concept of homelessness is only like what, 40 years old? So it's you know, it's a new concept. I think it was designed for a certain purpose, not a valid purpose, but using that concept and thinking about some set of problems, I think makes it hard for us to actually solve the problem because it's not a valid concept. So an example of that.
I wouldn't myself speak of invalid concepts, but of insufficiently defined, not insufficiently determined concept. But I think that all our concepts are aggregates, right? And they're approximate aggregates. The question is, are they useful for a given purpose? And you're absolutely right. The homelessness example of not precise enough. But I mean, there's so many ways of breaking down because there's so many cases and sub cases and sub solutions. And each concept is a hodgepodge. bad concept, because all concepts can be argued to be bad for a purpose or good for good enough for a purpose. There's identifying, is this concept fitting that purpose? And can we introduce useful new distinctions that will bring the discussion forward and help thinking? Or can we sometimes the opposite, merge categories that make it easier to think about things as a whole or abstractly? Both cases exist, but the question is division for what? But I agree totally. People thinking they talk about the same thing and not talking about the same thing is one huge problem.
Yeah, it's like the Tower of Babel, except I think in the Tower of Babel scenario, they don't understand each other because they sound gibberish to each other. So at least they know they're not talking about the same thing, right? Here we're all speaking English, but we might still not be talking about the same thing.
Yep. And being able to be very clear about concept boundaries so that we discover when we're not using the same boundaries, for me, is a key objective.
Right. Yeah, because the concept is supposed to capture a set of things in reality. And if the boundaries are not the same, then we're capturing different things. Yeah.
But
so that's my background as to how I got in here.
Cool.
You're saying you've done with making the premise and arguments explicit. I don't know if you've seen the work on debate map of Ben Ricks, who's mostly absent member of CDL, but he has a structure that captures some of that. One thing we've been talking a lot here is the question of canonicality, like how to know that two expressions of the same claim end up being the same thing. Is that something you've looked at? Curious.
No, I mean, it is something I'm aware of. Because like I said, I go back and I rewrite my sentences in different ways, and sometimes they're the same, sometimes they're not exactly the same. And so I'm aware that you can, at least in English, you can communicate the same idea using different structure of your sentence. That I do know. And some combination of structure will make it easier for you to validate the inference. Some will make it a little harder because you kind of jump through hoops. You got to convert, the P and the N, do that kind of stuff to validate it. But beyond just being aware of it, I don't have any plans to work on that right now.
Fair enough. Yeah, this has been a subject of considerable interest in some of our subgroups. Anybody else has questions or comments?
I was going to say that, the idea of canonicality, the idea of canonicality. Did I get that right? Now I'm still not even sure. I think
you got it.
Thank you. That was something that was important to me, or is important to me, and has been. And it's one of the reasons that CDL, when I found it, kind of just kind of lit up. I was happy that there are other people who are into that problem. For me, I've wanted to. I'm not in a place where I need to or can, just don't have the resources to look at. But I'm interested in using sort of like sentence embeddings. All the amazing progress with machine learning to try and help guide people towards finding similar sentences. I really, I want my tool or our tool or whatever the tool may be. I want a tool I would use to be humanistic in the sense that it doesn't tell you what is, but sort of, tries to rise to meet you, but then lets you override or ultimately make a determination and then learns from that information you're giving it on whether two things actually are the same. But yeah, I think there's a lot of exciting possibilities there once a tool gets enough users and data to start using something like sentence embeddings to try and figure out, are things similar or whatever the case may be, or identical, equivalent, I should say.
It might be kind of hard because my understanding of machine learning is that it doesn't actually learn anything. It just pattern match based on statistical frequency.
Yeah, but is the human
So-
brain any different? Yeah.
I think so. I think so. Because number one, we need a lot of less examples to draw conclusions about stuff, right? You want to like have a
We're better at zero-shot learning, though the machine learning is catching up on that. But I agree and disagree, right? On the one hand, totally true. Most machine learning systems have done their training and we're given the trained system and it won't learn anything new. Training kind of works for certain types of problems, but not for others. Like I've noticed a lot of the sentence embeddings. I've been playing with them a lot recently. And it doesn't understand negation. Like
Yeah.
two opposite sentences will have pretty much the same embedding, which for a premise conclusion system is pretty darn useless. There's no negation bit, and obviously,
But only useless if you need the machine to do all that work. But if the machine
Exactly.
can surface, hey, here's the relevant ones, although I can't tell you which side of the page they go on, then the human
that's already useful.
Yeah.
Yes.
yeah.
No, that I'm working on. Absolutely. It's a case. It's a useful case. It's important.
Yeah.
So another curiosity, you spoke of deductive and abductive. How many schemes of reasoning are you using? Are you using Walton's schemes, those in the book, which are even more than those usually found in the net, and so on? Are you aware of this?
I'm not aware of that book. As for how many different schemes do I have, that's only something that I've recently realized is a challenge. So like when I was having a discussion with the developer and Greg about a month ago about the technicality of the system, it was when I discovered and I confirmed with all experience that the challenge is not with the technology, the challenge is with the thinking and the logic. So the solution is to actually create a list of schemes. I guess that's the right term of using it. With different types of inferences is how I think of it, and have it be a part of the system in some way. I mean, the most trivial way is just like a help file, right? That lists them all out. But a more valuable way would have to be kind of like IntelliSense be in a system that kind of pops up for them to use.
The unfortunate problem, on the one good news, it's been done. And there are people like the Argumentation Schemes is an excellent book. It goes into this at fair amount of depth. The people at University of Dundee are using this scheme to great effect. The bad news is
what's the name of the book? Is it,
I put it in the chat.
Oh, okay. All right, thank you.
The bad news is it's precise enough that it requires some training to use well. So I think there's certainly something a bit different. There's some thinking to be done about how can we make this accessible to an untrained user? Right. Maybe, coarsen the categories a bit, or there's a lot of lists on the net like this one, which are less than the book. Carl, so be careful. That's a great list, but it's from an earlier article of Walton's, and the book has much more. But that list is all over the place. It's easy to find, but it's not the full list that Walton has in the book.
Okay, great, thanks.
It's just be aware of it. But yeah, even this one is not too easy to use, by the way. But helping people understand different, and there's many schemes, right? I love Walton's scheme. I think it's really well done. One thing that it does really well is identify the points of the feasibility for each argument. This argument could be proven false if this. Here are the kind of angles of attack for each of those schemes. Really beautiful work. But there's other schemes that have value in other ways. And I don't think there's ever going to be an absolute list. But this is a very good first approximation. And
okay, I appreciate it. I'll take a look at it and see what that, it'll probably expedite the process of me kind of thinking about how to design a system that will solve the problem of teaching these schemes to people who are not trained.
And that's definitely something we're all thinking about. I'll tell you some more about other stuff, but maybe I should let Carl, do you have something else, or Bentley?
I want to say, yeah, I completely agree. One of the biggest problems is concepts, the ambiguity and the differences. So yeah, that's kind of what I've found too. I'm not currently tackling that. I know Marc-Antoine's putting a lot of work in concepts. But it's definitely something I run into anytime I try and map something. One of the things I want to do is currently you can't have a dictionary. There's not a dictionary except for, there might be one, but it's one of those more snarky dictionaries than others. What you can't link to a single like definition. And I know that's not the same as concept, but like
Wiktionary?
I don't think
You
even
can't-
in Wiktionary you can't link
You
to
can't link to a specific. Wow. I was thinking WordNet.
Isn't that crazy?
Yes. Wouldn't WordNet, doesn't WordNet have a
WordNick?
WordNet.
Maybe. I mean, there could be some out there. I also don't see them wanting us to add 50 definitions for every word, you know, like all these little nuances. So I do have term.fyi that I keep thinking I just need to put up a simple website where you can add your own definitions saying this is the one I mean, and you can link to it. Anyways, that's just an aside. It doesn't help a lot, but helps a little because people still need to recognize they're using the term differently. But part of the thing is, you know, so like there's a famous famous in the Canonical Debate Lab, there's an IQ squared debate where they had the guy from Doctors Without Borders, like the guy who started that organization on there, and they were having something about military intervention. He had a completely different definition than the rest of the people. The whole debate was a huge waste of an hour because he was prepared for something completely different than what they are. And that's just because no one ever talked about what they meant by the word before they, you know, had 100 people in an audience sitting in front of them.
It's a very good example. It's a very good example. I just tried WordNet search, and yes, there is, when you click on one meaning, it gets bolded. It's not quite the same as, and that's in the URL. And so the URL reflects this version versus that version. For what it's worth.
Yeah, that's more than I found. I didn't run across that, so that's good.
But yeah, I agree. I mean, creating a collective dictionary of distinctions is a huge part of what I'm trying to build right now.
Yeah,
So,
oh, sorry. I was going to ask what Marc-Antoine's up to, because Bentley mentioned your heads down in something, but I also that's
several things.
So if you want to follow, Ben, if you had something you wanted to.
I'm heads down in mostly a contract for Jamie, so for Society Library. So that is, you know, I don't even know how much I can say. So, but this is specific. It's not the generic type of thing I'm doing. I've spent a lot of time with Daniel Norman trying to work on definitions of definitions.
And for an open library, it's very secretive, everything that happens with that organization. Sorry, I should probably not soapbox right now, but I probably have the luxury of you know, trying to.
I'm with you. I'm with you.
I'm with you.
This one is probably less, but I need to check. I know she's usually careful about what she.
Yeah.
So
well, if you can share, I'd just be curious. And especially to the degree what your thoughts are on the process right now. It doesn't have to be your specific project, because I know at one point you presented a schema.
Yep.
I personally didn't quite understand, but it looked interesting.
I still have this schema about matching terms many-to-many to concepts, but right now I'm more looking at the concept to concept. What are the relations between concepts, right? And when I say term many-to-many to concepts, of course, like we know, term has many definitions. Definition can be designated by many terms, but I assume pretty narrow concepts. And really, a concept is, when I said concept boundary, it's defined by the claims that define it. Now, and when I say the claims that define it, one intuition I have, which I'm already moving away from up to a point, but I still think it's a good intuition. It's if I make a claim about a concept, the claim may either be definitional or empirical. Like if I say all cats have tails, right? I haven't met the Manx yet. If you tell me some cats have no tails, my reaction could be, oh, I didn't know that about cats, and I'm revising my empirical knowledge about cats. Or I could say, I don't mean those weird tailless things. I mean real cats with tails. And I'm adjusting my definition to make the having a tail part of the definition. And then I'll find that I'm disagreeing with the world, which is fine, as long as we're clear about it. Lewis Carroll said, if somebody at the beginning of a book says white means black and black means white, okay. I don't necessarily agree with Carroll on this, but he was pointing out the arbitrariness of word meaning binding. And as long as we know what's happening, it's less of a disaster. So being able to say my definition of cat excludes Manx or excludes Sphinx or excludes whatever, right? Because I have this personal definition. If it's clear, it's clear. It's good enough. So this is about, but generally it's not the case. Most claims are empirical rather than definitional. Most of the time, when I tell you I think all cats have tails, I expect that if I'm told, no, look at this Manx, it will be a revision of empirical knowledge, not a revision of my ontology. And I should be able to ask the question, we're speaking of templates, is that if this were false about this animal that fits all your other criterion of cat but is tailless, would you call it something else? I think that's a good question to ask. Like, okay, I have this other name for the weird tailless cats. And then I know that this is a definitional characteristic. Otherwise, I'd revise my empirical knowledge about cats without changing my ontology. So the notion of would you call it something else if this were different is for me a key distinguishing question in distinguishing ordinary empirical claims from definitional claims. And then we can start asking about the limits of claims as determined by the feature lattice of definitional claims they obey. And of course, I expect some claims to be definitional for someone and empirical for someone else, and the whole social truth aspect, right? Nothing is true in and of itself. It's true for someone. But I think being able to have a database on this term, most people have agreed to this definition with those claims, except a few who differ on, and this is the one claim that most people split on how they interpret this term. It's this claim makes them split one way or another. And that becomes a kind of sociological, demographical question. And then when somebody uses this term, we can ask, oh, by the way, where do you stand on this one and this one? Maybe the top few polarizing claims of the term, and to know, okay, we think from this that you fit in this category of using this term. So that's what I'm thinking about these days.
Yeah, it's interesting.
You may or may not find this valuable, but the reason why I used the word valid concept previously,
yeah, please,
is because it's obvious. I've been studying objectivism for a while. I know Rand is mostly known for politics, but I think her more valuable contribution is in epistemology, and specifically identifying what's the purpose of concepts. Why does man need it? And so, given that purpose, what makes certain concepts valid? What makes certain concepts invalid? And it has to do with the essential nature of the thing that you're trying to capture. You're trying to draw a boundary around. And I found her ideas to be compatible with Aristotle genius differential format for definition, in terms of like what format should your definition be in. And it's interesting because when I look at the definitions that are on Trello, on like, let's say for claim or some other definitions, I do see them in that format, in the Aristotle format, where, you know, this thing is this broad category that's different than other things in this broad category because of these differentiate, right? Whereas the link that you sent me for the WordNet prison for the potential, that first definition of potential doesn't quite fit into that format. And so it's really hard to kind of see the boundaries, right? But when you say it's in this genius, but it has this different differentiate, it's very easy to see the boundaries of what this thing is. And so Aristotle's format, I think, is a good format to put definitions into. Anyway, going back to Dada concepts. So her idea is that, we're not born with concepts, but rather most of us learn our concept by observing other people. They call these things cats, and we like, oh yeah, they're cats. And if our definition is, like as a child who has only seen cats with tails, then a child may make the tail a part of the definition, or it might just say that the tail is a part of this concept cat, but it's not necessarily important enough to make it part of the definition, right? And if the child eventually grow up and see a cat without tail, at that point, I think the proper way to keep its concept valid is to add in catless tails into that folder, that concept of cats. And if its definition happens to include tail in it, recognize that tail is not the essential differences that differentiate cats from, let's say, dogs or other animals. And so what makes the definition valid? It has to do with what are the facts in reality that you're differentiating from. It's like, are these facts important or are they not important, right? So,
but that assumes that there's an objective ontology. Which is not an assumption I'd make in general. The problem is many of my examples are drawn for zoology where there is such a thing, kind of. Like often I make the example with mammals and monotremes, right?
Before you continue, can you explain to me what does the word objective ontology, what does it mean?
There's something that ontology is the study of being, and here I'm using it in a more restricted sense of a categorization of the world, right? There's this hierarchy of types and subtypes. In objective ontology, the question is, are these categories something in our mind or something out there in the universe? And objective ontology means it exists independently of our minds, which, and for zoology, it's really interesting because Aristotle called them natural kinds. And I was very much leaning on Aristotle when I speak about essential, non-essential characteristic, because our mind is very conditioned by natural kinds and taxonomy. We evolved, taxonomy was important for the ape brain. And so we have an intuitive notion of taxonomy that is pre-rational, pre-language, probably. We're able to recognize types of plants, types of animals as an independent module in the brain before we have language. And then we kind of put it in the taxonomy. And in the case of animals, it turns out with cladistics, there is a whole tree of life that we could derive. But a lot of more abstract concepts, and especially those on which we have the most trouble agreeing, socialism is my favorite example, right? When McConnell says this is socialism, and when Engels speaks of socialism, or when Sanders speaks of socialism, they're not talking about the same concept at all. There's almost no relation between the way they think of what defines socialism. And it's not clear that there's a common super definition even. It's just almost disjoint definitions. And there's no natural ontology on socialist and non-socialist social orders. It's purely how we choose to classify things. There's nothing out
Okay,
there
so-
in the natural world that
Right.
distinguishes socialist from non-socialist countries.
Right.
Hey guys,
So
I'm
the
gonna
idea,
need to use this Zoom in about
Oh.
another 5 minutes for something else. I should have left extra time. So
I
maybe we
could.
can,
you didn't know we were gonna have this conversation. All right, I'm gonna stop this thread. It's a thread. I'd like to continue further, but I want to let you guys have the 5 minutes for any other topic you guys want to talk about.
Or I could take on the Zoom and continue, but
well, I don't know. if
no,
we
I
would
could,
be,
I could start a 40-minute Zoom.
a different
Three.
Zoom, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, if y'all
I-
wanna do
Thought
it.
for piano lessons personally. But
Okay, so
doesn't-
natural stop.
can't continue.
Natural
Right.
stop. Okay.
But then I think we'll go ahead and end it up. But yeah, we'll try and figure out a Zoom ID for next week and we'll meet again around this time.
It is a good time. Sorry for arriving late.
No problem. Thanks for coming.
Let's put it in the calendar and I'll be there next time on time.
Yeah, it's not even really in the official calendar yet, so.
Great to meet the two new people.
Yeah,
Yes.
Great to see you, Ben. Great to see everyone else.
Great to meet you. And I
Yeah,
look forward to continuing that conversation.
Yes, take care.
All right, bye
Bye.
everybody.